Good morning. And before we get into the meat of the video this morning, there's a couple of things I need to say. First things first, I need to apologise to you guys because I've not been putting out a lot of videos over the past couple of weeks. And the reason for that is, well, there's two reasons. Firstly, my boy was off last week from school and we had a lot of fun, but it did stop me putting out videos. And second, this week I've not been feeling too well. I've been a little bit under the weather, so that's put a little bit of a kink in my ability to make videos as well. So apologies for that. If you guys have hung around waiting for me to put out a video though, I hope you enjoy this one. And if you have been waiting around, hopefully you've subscribed and hit post notifications, the little bell that is. If you haven't, if you want to do that now, if you enjoy my videos and you'd like to hear more from me, if you do that, and I do have a little hiatus like I have over the last week or so, then you'll be informed when I actually do get around to putting out a new video. And that will help given that YouTube's current policies aren't helping anybody. So yeah, if you like to see my videos and you like to hear from me, make sure you hit those notifications. But let's get on with the actual video itself. What am I talking about today? Well, it's to do with something the gaming industry have been up to, surprisingly, that is quite negative. And what it is there's been a court case going on between the ESA and MADE. Now, the ESA is the Entertainment Software Association. You should know all about those guys. And MADE, you may not know who they are. That's the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment. And they're in a bit of a to and fro because MADE wants to be able to preserve old games, both for research and for entertainment. And the ESA seems to have a problem with that. Specifically as it relates to multiplayer games and multiplayer games that require a central server. According to an article in Ars Technica, in 2015, the Library of Congress issued a limited exemption to the DMCA, allowing gamers and researchers to circumvent technological prevention measures, TPMs, that require internet authentication servers that have been taken offline. Despite strong pushback from the Entertainment Software Association at the time, the Register of Copyrights argued that the abandonment of those servers preclude all gameplay, a significant adverse effect. In other words, it meant that people couldn't play those games anymore. But the article goes on and it says, but while getting around defunct server authentication checks in games is now legally okay in most cases, the register stopped short of allowing gamers and researchers to recreate the centralized gameplay servers that are needed to play many games online. That's why the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment is leading the charge for what it calls a modest expansion of the DMCA exemption in order to preserve abandoned online video games in playable form. So in effect, what they're saying is they want to be able to recreate these servers so people can still play these games. And they go on to say that the reason for wanting to do this is to allow for scholarly work and stuff like that. So this sounds to me like a really good idea. It allows for people to play the games, it allows for people to research those games, and I can't actually see that there's any real argument against it. But surprisingly enough, the ESA sees this quite differently. The article goes on to say that making these games playable after those original servers go down often requires breaking apart existing client and/or server code in order to implement new interoperable software components as part of the game's architecture. Basically what that means is getting into the code that the original game developers made. And this is an issue of intellectual property, I suppose. So the ISA wants to prevent MADE from getting into these games and doing that because they see that it's an infringement of their intellectual property. That's the way I see it anyway. I'm no lawyer, but that's the way I see it. And this is what the ESA say. Simulating proprietary server code in this way requires copying large parts of the expressive nature of the games in question, server-hosted content that often was never distributed to the public. And, May does argue that restoring online functionality focuses more on the functional aspects of the game, which is usually allowed under fair use exemptions. So I suppose in this sense there is an argument to be had, but I would always err on the side that, if you don't do this, these games are simply not going to be playable anymore. And the really sad thing about that is that the ESA seem to be worried about this as well, but from totally the wrong angle. If I read you what the Ars Technical-Artica says in relation to their view on this is what they had to say. This gets to the heart of the ESA's argument against the expanded DMCA exemption, namely the industry's fear that such efforts will go beyond mere preservation in research institutions and expand to allow the general public to log into these old games once again. Okay, I don't quite understand why that's such a problem. It seems to me that what they're saying is they don't want people playing these games. And, what is wrong with wanting to log on and play old games? Is the ESA worried that if people are going to do that, they won't be buying new games and spending money on microtransactions and DLC? Is that what they're really about? It seems to me that this is very similar to the way the record industry went about treating some of the less popular music when it came to archiving it. They didn't seem to be bothered about it at all. Once they were done making money with it, they were quite happy to see it wither and die. But this is worse in a way as well, because it's actively seeking to put impediments in place to stop people enjoying these games. Games they've often played for years and sometimes decades. And seemingly all because the ESA is more concerned with, stopping people from getting into the guts of old code? Apart from this strange argument of intellectual property, which, okay, I can understand that with new stuff, but with old stuff where there doesn't seem to be any bearing on profits or anything else, this idea of intellectual property, it becomes moot almost. What are they afraid of? Is it just that they'd rather protect their intellectual property by letting it wither and die than let anyone else get their hands on it? Because if that's the case, it's equivalent to a kid breaking a toy they're done with so nobody else can play with it. It's mine, you're not having it. It's selfish and it's bordering on insanity. Is the games industry really that paranoid? But look, this idea that people will play the games rather than study them it's also telling in another way. It shows a complete lack of understanding of how scholars work, which isn't really surprising given that we're dealing with people who've never really engaged either with gaming as a pastime or with scholarly pursuits in any way beyond using study to advance their career prospects. Basically, what we're dealing with here is suits and lawyers, and my experience of those guys is that they're often narcissistic children. Highly intelligent narcissistic children, admittedly, but children nonetheless. Just look at the exploitative nature of the modern gaming industry, and you can see the hands of these single-minded parasites all over it. But I'm getting off subject. So tell me, ESA, how can anyone study anything without first engaging with it? If you don't play a game, you can't talk about it. It would be like the book industry insisting that as soon as a book comes out of copyright, it should be burned. It would have been a lot of fun when I was at university trying to write essays on Shakespeare if the publishing industry had insisted that I wasn't allowed to read the bloody books. And look, there's a reason why people studying history are obsessed with primary sources. Reading someone else's view on a subject may be interesting or even enlightening, but it's always best to get as close to the source material as possible. That's as true of games as it is of any other discipline. Surely. And for me, as someone who's getting increasingly sick of the machinations of the AAA gaming industry, I've started to look backwards more and more to games that were simpler and not bogged down with DLC, season passes, microtransactions, loot boxes, and all the other crap that we have to suffer through now in order to play our favourite games. But the gaming industry doesn't want us playing those older games, do they? They're like medieval Christians destroying secular poetry so that people wouldn't realise there was an alternative to church-sanctioned art. It was a bloody disgrace back then, and it's a bloody disgrace now. Anyone who seeks to restrict the access to art is a dangerous idiot, whether they're doing it because of some misguided belief that it will corrupt the mind of those engaging with it, or because, like some latter-day Scrooge, they're trying to keep it all to themselves and would rather see it burn than fall into the hands of anybody else. The Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment is trying to preserve gaming history, and whether that's for recreational purposes or for serious academic study is all but irrelevant. That the gaming industry would try and block such attempts speaks volumes. But anyway, that's my view on it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments and we can have a discussion about it. And if you really want to get into it with me, come over to my Discord. I'm usually on there and we can have a chat on there as well. There's a link to it in the description box of this video. So come on over and we'll have a chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to go and get myself another cup of tea and I'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.